that the length-tension relationship in cardiac muscle is only important in a particular range. That's this range from about here somewhere down to here. This cardiac muscle works in that range primarily. This is, of course, the muscle, length tension. This is cardiac muscle. It all depends on action myosin overlap. And that, in many textbooks, if you don't use the conventional one, something else will tell you that that's the complete basis of Starling's law. Well, it turns out that people have been around for a long time and misinterpreted it to some extent. And in actual fact, Starling's experiment was very simple. Took a ventricle, probably out of a mammal or something, and he would pull off the aorta and he would measure the pressure. So there's no valve involved. So the theoretical maximum pressure is very high, but in actual fact, in the working heart, you have a valve that opens about here. So Starling's law really based on the fact that you get more preload, more ventricular filling, and the stroke volume then becomes larger. So the ventricle is more completely. And the valve, since the valve opens here, you don't sort of follow Starling's law completely. Only in terms of pressure volume thing, it only goes up to about here because of the valve. Now, if the valve was closed, then of course you would hit theoretical maximum, which is somewhere up there. So that's the issue with Starling. Be careful when you read something other than get on. And of course, it's important to making sure the two ventricles pump the same volume. We talked about this is higher for a while, continuing circulation, increase the preload here, and this will then catch up after 2 beats, 6 or 7 beats down the road. On a 1-to-1 beat basis, there's a difference. But at an average of 10 beats or so, the 2 chambers pump roughly the same volume of blood. Almost exactly. So that's a bit of a review there. Now, the other part of the circulation, we talked about how cardiac output can be altered. I want to talk about a little bit about how you control peripheral circulation. It's all the blood vessels. Now, one of the things we did talk about, or did mention the fact that arterioles maintain resistance and they receive sympathetic tone exclusively, and that's ongoing all the time, and it maintains a resistance so that, in fact, you have a blood pressure. If you lose the sympathetic tone, for whatever reason, accident, stroke, overdose of some recreational drugs sometimes will do that, the blood pressure falls drastically. It drops to about 30 millimeters of mercury, and that is not conducive to life. So unless you have a cardiologist standing there with his syringe full of norepinephrine, you're confessing your sins almost instantaneously. So anyway, that's the issue. So we've talked about that. The comment there, the peripheral circulation is essentially under dual control, centrally to the nervous system, which is the autonomic nervous system, and specifically the sympathetic. Parasympathetic plays a role, but in certain conditions only. And locally by tissues in the environment, by the tissues in the environmental conditions in the immediate vicinity of the blood vessels. So if you get a buildup of CO2, or a buildup of lactic acid, that will cause an increase in the blood flow. So whatever is happening in the vicinity of the arterioles and the capillaries will control the circulation. So that's peripheral stuff. One of the mechanisms that's been around for a while is called autoregulation. It occurs in the brain. The kidneys are another location where you have autoregulation. And the brain, kidney, and the heart, they all auto-regulate. So many vascular beds maintain a constant flow to some degree independent of the pressure. So if the pressure drops, the flow remains the same. If the pressure increases substantially a little bit, the flow remains the same. That's called auto-regulation. Show you a graph of auto-regulation, what I mean by auto-regulation. This is an example. This was a couple other tubes. This is one elastic tube. This is a rigid blood vessel like a copper pipe. But in reality, this is increasing pressure in this direction. There's a narrow range of flow through that particular organ, which remains more or less constant. That's called auto-regulation. Occurs in the brain, kidney, heart. Kidney is very, very clearly. Brain larger to maintain and improve blood pressure for whatever reason, and trying to keep you making right decisions. And of course, the heart. So those are the major three organs that auto-regulate. So basically, auto-regulation simply is maintaining a constant flow over a narrow, fairly narrow pressure, 30 millimeters of mercury. Not very broad, because eventually you go to this range here, the thing will increase, and if you drop below that range, you can't do it. So it's a fairly narrow pressure range, but it auto-regulates normally, and kidneys certainly are a very good example. And I think Dr. Saunders will tell you about that again. Now, one of the other factors that's important in regulation of peripheral circulation is what is known as the cellular layer, which is known as the endothelium. And capillaries, they make up the whole tube, endothelial cells, but in every blood vessel, endothelial cells line the blood vessel. It's always an endothelial layer. Cross-section of a blood vessel. Intimal layer is surrounded by this sort of layer of cells, a sort of spindle shape and for proper flow. And these are the endothelial cells, right lying inside or the lumen of the blood. They're kind of interesting cells, because you can grow endothelial cells in tissue culture. And then they become kind of spherical or round, and they don't respond to too much. So basically, in order for endothelial cells to work properly, they have to be exposed to flow. And flow produces something called shear stress, and that sort of makes the endothelial cells spin shape, and they do their thing, and they secrete all kinds of things. You have to have flow in these guys. So, what does the endothelium do? Well, the endothelium are an important source of several important vasoactive components. One is nitric oxide, are also known as endothelium-derived relaxing factors. That was the name for years until several investigators decided that this compound of nitric oxide, which is a gas, and people that suffer from narrowing of the coronary arteries, they get angina, they get these little puffers, and that little puffer contains nitric oxide. So it vasodilates blood vessels. Other things, acetylcholine, not a big player, bradykinin, stimulate the same sort of pathway, which causes formation of nitric oxide from arginine, which is in the cell. Nitric oxide diffuses into the vascular smooth muscle cells and increases cyclic GMP levels primarily, which causes which is based very simply on activating potassium channels in the smooth muscle cell, and probably deactivating to some extent L-type calcium channels. So it causes vasodilatation, and nitroglycerin is the thing that you would, tablets that they take, and you take that because you know actually when it comes to the GI tract it releases nitric oxide. And as far as I know, people who are on nitroglycerin tablets don't explode. So that's a good thing. But anyway, when it goes to the GI tract, it releases nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator of all kinds of vascular smooth muscle. So basically we're talking about relaxation of these guys. Context over here, so people create an awful lot of resistance. This is your autoregulation, and this is one of the mechanisms by which autoregulation may work. So if you have a blood vessel, and for some reason or other, the pressure is increased. Question number 7 on the exam is kind of ridiculous. The blood pressure goes up. So what happens is the smooth muscle cell membrane is stretched. So this works primarily on smooth muscle, and also has an effect to the endothelium as well. So you get an opening of stretch-activated channels. Now, what kind of channels they are is not really determined at the moment, but they're probably these channels which are known as trip channels. They're involved in all kinds of sensory things like taste, smell, and they're basically stretch activated. So they stretch, they open up, and they pass a little bit of calcium, and they also pass a little bit of sodium. So once you get that, you get some depolarization of the muscle. Voltage-gated calcium channels open, the L-type. You get calcium influx and you get constriction. So you try to restore the basal flow. That's through channels and smooth muscle. The other path of this is, of course, through the metabolites. What's going on in the vicinity of the tissue. So you get increased pressure, you get increased flow, you dilate, dilute the metabolites like lactic acid, CO2. You get an inhibition of this, and eventually end up with constriction. So that's the way you control if the pressure is increased. On the other hand, if the pressure is decreased, all these things close off, and the pressure would then increase. So it gives you a push-pull effect. And this is one example of when the pressure is increased. If the pressure is decreased, you get all sort of the opposite effects and all of these pathways. So that's the way autoregulation is likely to work. And the idea there is to maintain a constant blood flow over a fairly reasonable pressure range. And this is just an example of the nitric oxide pathway. You get an elevation of calcium, activated phenol. So from L-arginine to oxygen, you get nitric oxide, which is a gas and is freely diffusible. So it goes from the endothelial cell into the smooth muscle to activate the cyclic G pathway, which probably acts on potassium channels and likely calcium channels. So this is all kinds of vasodilating substances, bradykinin and ADP. The other pathway, which is interesting, is that this is the vascular lumen, and there are integrins that are hanging out here from the membrane of the endothelial cell. So, as blood flows past that, it creates what is known as shear stress. It tugs on the membrane a little bit. That also activates an increase in calcium level, and it will give you vasodilation. So that's another mechanism. So shear stress is really important on endothelial cells. As you can show, or people have shown, that if you look at isolated blood vessels, by changing the flow, increasing the flow, for example, you get a larger release of nitric oxide. And that has to work through this mechanism that 80 grams kind of sort of hanging out there, and the flow increases, the tension on them becomes greater, and you get more calcium into the cell, and of course you release nitric oxide. There's of course many other pathways, but the issue is you try and relax these muscle cells. Okay, so that's what happens locally, all kinds of things. Although I did mention acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is kind of interesting because it's released by the parasympathetics. And the issue with acetylcholine is kind of complex because acetylcholine has all kinds of acetylcholine esterases and acetylcholine, and the blood is full of them. So you don't get much of an effect of ACH by release of acetylcholine. But it would in fact cause release of nitric oxide. It's not a big player. So basically extrinsic control. So this means control from elsewhere rather than a local environment in the tissue. Several pathways, or two anyway. One, circulating levels of adrenaline and noradrenaline, completely from the adrenal medulla, during various sort of activities, fight or flight, that sort of thing. You get release of noradrenaline. And the mixture consists of about 75 adrenaline, that's released into the circulation, about 25% noradrenaline. So they act on various alpha and beta receptors, and that's not just one or two. There's subclasses of all of these things, which if you take pharmacology, you'll learn all about. So that's one. Sympathetic nervous system is the other. And that's the one that generates tone to the arterioles. And lo and behold, which I haven't said much about, the veins as well. The veins normally contain about between 50 and 60, a large portion of the blood volume, certainly a liter or so, because they're very extensible structures and they're actually a storage for blood. So, the actual mechanism starts in what is called the vasomotor center. It's located in the brainstem, dorsal medulla. And we'll talk about, Dr. Barton mentioned this already, the baroreceptive reflex. And in fact, everybody in the sort of blood loss will be about baroreceptive reflexes. Anyway, so that's part of the baroreceptive reflex. And then this region, of course, as I said, generates sympathetic tone. So that's a low level of activity going to arterioles and also goes to the smooth muscle of blood vessels. But tone in blood vessels isn't that strong. It only occurs, it gets turned on really hard if you actually lose blood and require to have the veins constrict and increase cardiac output. So it only occurs in certain instances, but you do get some tone through veins. But it's not as crucial or as important as it is with the arterioles. So, increase in tone causes constriction of arterioles, so that would decrease your total peripheral resistance. And veins. And basically what happens there is the veins constrict and they shift the blood from the venous system to the arterial system in an attempt to increase blood pressure. So you decrease the volume of the veins and increase resistance in the arterial artery. In addition to the above, there are sympathetic fibers going to the blood vessel and skeletal muscle. These prepares the individual for exercise. These sympathetic fibers are centrally activated, so it's not part of that baroreceptor reflex. The issue, though, is, I mean, people mention it, books all like to talk about it, but the only place that these kinds of nerve fibers, sympathetic nerve fibers that release acetylcholine, have been completely demonstrated is in dogs. Humans may or may not have it. But the idea is that a lot of work done about 20 years ago saying that, in fact, these were activated centrally, so if you're going to run up a flight of stairs, these fibers would be activated to increase blood flow to skeletal muscle so that you could run up a flight of stairs or swim away from, I don't know, Darcy Portage in the bar or whatever. Not too many hockey fans here, I see. Anyway, controversial. If you see this in the text, I'm certainly not going to ask you an exam about the should, but I won't. The controversy. Now, the parasympathetic is important, but not in actually regulating the circulation. Specifically, vasodilatation causes in certain places, but the effects are local, and they provide fluid for the secretory process. So the GI tract would have parasympathetic fibers going to it, salivary glands. I think I gave you the example, I gave somebody the example of dog like drool. And one of the old experiments that was done is, in fact, we isolated the nerve to a couple of the salivary glands, drive it real hard for 20 minutes, and then you measure the hematocrit before and after the experiment. And in fact, the hematocrit goes up because we've lost fluid. So that's what these guys do primarily. They don't really have any kind of a role in blood pressure management or circulatory management. But they are important if you want to eat a steak and secrete lots of saliva and enzymes and fluid and things like that. So that's what the parasympathetic is. Very specific, very localized. And this is an example of what you'll swear, which it's in color, we should be able to figure it out. Not probably got a bit of a problem, I think. Anyway, the idea is what these innervate. Well, we'll start out with, of course, the old friend, the sympathetic, so the adrenal medulla. There is no tone to the adrenal medulla, so it's a sympathetic outflow to the medulla that is only activated in times of stress. So it's an on-off. Every place else, arterioles, veins, you get sympathetic tone. And of course, give sympathetic tone to the heart. And of course, the pacemaker, the AV node, and ventricular tissue as well. This is sort of the higher centers that I talked about, what goes to blood vessels in skeletal muscle, where acetylcholine is transmitted. And of course, you have the same sort of case with sweat glands. These are the sweat glands that are involved in nervous sweating, primarily. So that's the sympathetic outflow for the ganglion somewhere or other. And these guys presumably are centrally activated, but it's not very exciting. Maybe yes, maybe no. If you're a dog, you probably have them. Human, not sure. The other pathway, of course, is the parasympathetic. It does go to the sinoatrial node to regulate heart rate. It does go to the atrioventricular node to modulate or regulate conduction through that region, atrioventricular node. And something that just came out recently is the fact that you do get parasympathetic fibers going to ventricular tissue, releasing acetylcholine. Probably won't find that in Ganot, but it's true. And the action there is not so much to do a relaxation of the ventricular tissue, but it's to counteract the effects of the sympathetic. And there's very good evidence showing that, in fact, you do get parasympathetic activation or innervation of the ventricles as well. The other pathway of the parasympathetic arteries and veins, and these are all various sort of things, salivary glands, GI tract, to do specific things for digestion, excrete saliva, whatever. That's parasympathetic. But the only real regulatory part of the parasympathetic as far as pressure goes, volume, regulation is, in fact, only the heart. The SA node, the AD node, we see parasympathetic tone. It's not clear whether there's tone going to the ventricles or not. It's not clear. Now these guys can, in fact, be, all of them can be centrally activated. For example, something that is known as the vasovagal attack, which is emotional fainting. Willie Nelson walks in here, you're all fans. My colleague, Dr. Doss faints. That's centrally activated. And what that does, of course, is you get really strong activation of the parasympathetics and SA node, AD node. You can actually block conduction through the AD node. So if you're in a rock concert, some guy next to you faints, and you measure his pulse, you'll find that the pulse rate is about 35 or 40, largely ventricular. And fortunately, we'll talk a little bit about baroreceptors, which actually then recover, and the person doesn't die because of that. Anyway, so a lot of these have central effects: fight or flight, fainting. Okay, I think that Dr. Doss has a little job to do for me. Questions? I'm going to be in every morning until the 19th, I think. And I think we have a review on Thursday, but I don't think he's announced it. Pardon? Oh, there's an email? Okay, I don't know that. So it's Thursday at 2 o'clock, so we'll answer questions. So I have questions.
Yeah, apparently.
I didn't know about it until this morning.
When is it?
This
Thursday.
Like
What time? 10? I mean, 2 o'clock. 2 to 3:30 apparently. I'm not sure where.
I didn't get an email.
Oh, is it the evaluation?
I didn't get an
Are
email.
we doing evaluations?
I didn't get an email.
I didn't get email. I heard from them. Are you sure it's not in
We have one more lecture, which I'll
Are
finish
you
up.
already disconnected?
If you have questions, I'll be in every morning
I find
till the 19th.
even though it's
Just
connected.
show up.
I always get an email later.
So he's leaving? I have a question to ask.
I think it's just evaluations.
Hey, why is this? Look at this. Why is it?
Why does it go to increase?
Why is it constriction restores it different? Isn't constricting it increase the pressure more? Why does constriction decrease the pressure to the